We're here on Pirongia Peak. Is that the right name for it?
Pirongia Mountain. We're not on the peak.
Yes.
But we're on the slopes of the mountain.
Yes, with Tui Allen, a wonderful person who I've been in touch with, who's a lover of the cetaceans, and she's written a very awesome book called Ripple. And speaking of I said it. Your book is being translated into the Czech language, and that word has a special significance, doesn't it?
Well, it's a word that they use for a certain part of the female anatomy that it's probably not too polite to mention to a stranger the first time you speak to them, as we often do if you walk into a shop and you're not sure how to ask for something in some foreign language. You tend to walk into the shop and say, Well, don't if you're in Czechoslovakia, or the Czech Republic,
yes,
as we should say. Because it's not a word that you should start conversations with there.
But they get a blast out of it, probably, or that they've come to realize that how often people who speak English say that even without thinking.
Yes, they've heard it before more than once, so don't be surprised if they burst out laughing when you become the 100th person to say it that they've experienced in their life.
That's funny. Well, so tell us about how you came to love the dolphins, and maybe about your early life and your adventures sailing around the world. And
okay,
I said it again.
I grew up in Auckland in a sailing family, the archetypal Auckland sailing family, and we spent all our school holidays sailing around in the Gulf and all the islands, and we met a lot of whales and dolphins and cetaceans then. And I married a boat builder in 1973, and our first marital home was a little wooden sailing boat, an H-28 design called Patricia, and we set off to the South Pacific in 1973 and sailed across the ocean. Now, when we started the voyage, we had an engine in the boat, and we had 4 gallons of petrol on board, and when we came back, I think about 15 months later, we had the same 4 gallons of petrol still there because the engine never really worked, and we sailed everywhere. So we were out there on the ocean with a wing in the wind and a fin in the sea, very much living as the whales and the dolphins live. And so because of that, they didn't see us as quite such an intrusion into their world as a boat with an engine might seem to them. So we saw a lot of whales and dolphins out there, and sailing in the ocean at night with the stars above and all around. I'd be out on watch at night alone sometimes for several hours, and you'd be thinking about the world that you were in. And I was thinking a lot about the cetaceans and the creatures who lived out there, the birds and other animals that were there, but especially about the dolphins and whales. And I used to think about what they would be thinking about. And once you're out there and it's night time, it's pretty obvious pretty soon that the main thing they must be thinking about is stars, because there's just nothing else to see. There's just blackness full of stars all around you. They're everywhere. They're blazing, brighter than you ever see them when you're on land, because out in the middle of the ocean there's no light pollution, and so you're really seeing the stars as the cetaceans themselves see them. So I used to think about that, and I'd think about if you were a dolphin, how would you fill your life? And I'd make lists of vocations that a dolphin might have. Like a dolphin might be a poet, a historian. They might be a musician. They might be all sorts of vocations that they might have. They might be a health professional. They might be an astronomer. They might be a meteorologist because of the weather that they'd be encountering. Mm-hmm. But they're never going to be a plumber or an electrician, although they might know quite a bit about electricity.
Yes.
They're never going to be an accountant.
Or a stonemason.
Or a stonemason, or a sculptor, or a painter.
Or a lawyer.
Or a lawyer. Well, they might be a lawyer. For all we know, there might be laws out there in the sea that they need to think about. But there's some things that they certainly couldn't be. But I found plenty of things that could go on the list of vocations that a cetacean might have. And those a lot of those thoughts went into the story of Ripple, which I should show you. I've got a copy here. But yeah.
Now, this is very, very interesting. And so you sailed around the Pacific Ocean, and how many nights do you reckon that you've spent on the sea?
I've lost count.
Thousands?
I suppose. Well, we lived on board the boat, so even when we were in port, we were on the boat living. And by the time you count up all the sailing I did in childhood, and the sailing that when we were actually cruising in the South Pacific, I would have no idea. But we were on board for 15 months at that one stretch. So if you count up all I'm not very good at maths. I'm sure there could be dolphin mathematicians that could work it out for me. But maths is not my thing. So no more mathematical questions.
Oh, but that's so interesting to have sailed so much and totally without a motor. Because you were telling me about a time when you had to sort of you had to row yourself out.
Yeah, we were coming. There was no wind. The wind had died, and the wind was our method of powering the boat. So we were just drifting onto some coral reef that was. You don't want your boat to go into a coral reef because you can tear holes in your hull. So we had a dinghy, a little rowboat, and what we did was we tied a rope from the dinghy to the boat, and we got into the rowboat and we rowed. And my husband rowed, and then others of us had to turn. And by towing the boat in the dinghy, we were able to very slowly get ourselves away from danger until we were far enough away that we could relax a bit more, and then we waited for the wind to come up and sailed away. But there's always a way around not having an engine. As long as you had sail and as long as you had oars, you can get yourself out of all sorts of fixes.
Well, that tells me a lot about the art of sailing and about how much unnecessary motoring that goes on out there, where people don't really have to do it. They could get by without having a motor or without using it so much if they really wanted to.
Well, when we landed on an island called Rowell Island in the Kermadec, not that many people have landed there, but we sailed into this tiny little cove, and it wasn't the safest place to anchor a boat, but we were sailing in and all around this cove trying to find the best place to anchor. And the guys on the island watching us said to us later that they had no idea that a sailing boat could be so manoeuvrable in such a small space just under sail. But I mean, my ex-husband was a very, very skilled sailor, and he could do anything, and so they must have been quite impressed with watching him handle the boat in there. He was on the helm giving the orders, and I was on the foredeck doing the sail work, because I was always the worker on the crew.
It was usually just the two of you.
At that time there were two of us, but there were four in the crew, but the other two had already landed on the island.
Yes.
At that particular time, but we sailed to Tonga and Fiji, Tonga and Samoa, with four of us on the boat, and then by the time we came back to New Zealand, it was just my husband and I on our own. Just the two of us did the final passages.
Yes.
Out there.
Did you guys visit Niue Island?
No, we didn't. We cruised up through the Kermadecs were our first landfall, and that was a very interesting and exciting landfall. I could go on for about half an hour about that alone, but I won't. We went up from there.
But you can.
We went up through the Tonga group. We sort of cruised up through Nuku'alofa and on up to Vavau, which is northern Tonga, and then we went from there to American Samoa, which is Pango. And then we sailed around there for quite a while, and we stopped for quite a long time there because the boys got a bit of work boat building there. And then we sailed north-west to Wallis Island, which is a little bit of French Polynesia, quite close to the equator. That was the closest we got to the equator. And then sailed down through the Fiji group from north through towards south. And we did a bit of sailing around Kandavu and so on in Fiji, and then we sailed home to New Zealand quite a lot later. Yeah.
Well, did you go to the Cook Islands?
No, we didn't go that far east. Yeah.
Okay, and how about Tahiti?
No.
I don't really have that clear of a...
No, we didn't go that far east. We were more sort of the other side.
So was this before you became a school teacher?
No, I was a school teacher when I left New Zealand. I'd already done a year and a half's teaching.
Okay.
And then came back and worked for a little while when we first got back as a sailmaker, and then went back into teaching again, and I taught for many years after that in Auckland schools and South Auckland schools, and then when we moved to the Waikato, I even taught in some Waikato schools for a while. Yeah.
When did you write your first children's books?
That would have been probably the 1980s. I was writing children's books because I was at home with little children, and so it seemed natural to write books for children, and I wrote several stories that were published in the school journals, and a children's picture book and some little junior readers that are used by schools to teach children to read were published by Shortland, and my other publishers were my other publishers for children's book were Mallinson Rendell and the school journals. So,
was one of the readers the book about the little wee bear?
Yes, the well-fed bear, that was one of them, and a couple of others.
And the cat that sails with the laundry?
Yeah, that was Captain Clancy, the Flying Clothesline. That's an interesting story because it was published in 1987, and it's kind of got a bit of immortality in that it's been played as an audio file, I suppose you call it, on the radio ever since. Nearly every year, 2 or 3 times you'll hear Clancy being played on the national program or one of those. Oh. And so I feel as if if it's lasted 25 years, it's probably going to continue. It might even outlive me.
As officially ingrained as a New Zealand cultural institution.
Well, I hope. But certainly the story itself did a lot better than the book did. So I have my own ideas on why that might be. So, but I sort of haven't really been doing much children's writing. But what that led on to, because children's picture books were my passion back then, I kind of had a pipe dream of wanting to illustrate my work as well. But really I was a writer, not an artist. And when I submitted illustrated stories to publishers, the publishers usually always made the good decision of accepting my words but not accepting my art.
Oh.
So, but then I always had that wish. I wanted to do both sides of it. And then someone kindly invented the internet, and I became a web designer.
It was DARPA.
Yeah, is that who it was?
Yes.
Okay. Well, the internet, when it first started up, had this insatiable need for people to make illustrated words to populate the web with. So I started making websites, and I got to illustrate them with my own photographs and my own artwork and my own words. So for a long time I was a happy little web designer, achieving my dream of creating illustrated words. But it wasn't for children, it was mostly for adults, and it
Yes.
wasn't fiction, it was mostly non-fiction.
Well, so now tell us about your current book, Ripple, that's so wonderful. It's basically told from the perspective of dolphins living on our planet, but 20 million years ago, before there was people. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. 20 million years ago is the setting for the story, and at that time New Zealand wasn't even here. It was just a few islands sticking up out of the sea. Humans had not evolved yet. We were still monkeys swinging around in the treetops, but there were dolphins fully evolved swimming in the oceans. They were kentriodontid dolphins, who are ancestors of most of the modern dolphins swimming in the seas today, and those were my characters.
Who was your friend, the researcher, the fossil guy down at Dunedin?
That was Ewan Fordyce. He's the cetacean fossil expert at University of Otago, and he actually helped a lot in the early stages of planning Ripple and later on as well. It was Ewan Fordyce who prevented me from having my dolphins swimming along a coastline. He was the one who said no, there wasn't one then. So, and also I wanted my dolphins to be as long ago in the past as they could possibly accurately be dolphins there.
Yes.
And so I said, how long ago were there dolphins swimming around, and he said, well, I'll show you the oldest fossil we have. And he brought out a fossil of a 20 million year old dolphin, and I have a photograph of my hands on that fossil skull. And he was able to tell me a lot of information about the ocean setting that it swam in. He was able to show me cabinets full of fossils that came from that era that dolphin lived. So it gave me, and I was able to take photographs of all that, and it gave me a great background of the setting that my story was happening in. And it was interesting because he and his team of young scientists were able to discuss this fossil with me, and they were able to tell me so much factual information about the fossil that was useful to me in my story writing, and I was then able to repay them by telling them all the fiction about the fossil. So I was able to say, well, it's a female, and this is what she did in her lifetime, and they were quite intrigued to hear it. I was able to bring their dusty old fossil to life for them in a way that they were
with some creative imagination.
Yeah, they were surprisingly interested to hear that.
Yes, after they had been arguing over whether it was male or female.
Yes, I heard them trying to decide. I asked if they knew if it was male or female, and they seemed to have different ideas. So I said, well, I can tell you she's female, because that was my piece of fiction that I could contribute to their knowledge of this object in front of us.
So how did the story of Ripple evolve? Did you start working on it in your mind for years and make notes, or did you just sit down and just start writing it? Because it definitely ties in with what you were just saying about the thoughts that you'd have on the deck of the ship at night, thinking about what the dolphins would do. And
well, you remember I was telling you about their vocations.
Yes.
Well, and I was going through making these lists of what they could be and couldn't be, and then I thought about, what about, could a dolphin be a musician? And then my thoughts from there went, well, this is decades ago. This is like probably 20 years ago now that I started thinking about this. And I was thinking, could a dolphin be a musician? And then I thought, well, there's a fact that I'd heard, and I'd actually heard it from Wade Doak, who's another one of our cetacean experts that we have here in New Zealand. And he told me that the dolphin brain has 10 times the capacity of the human brain for processing sound. And I'm thinking, could they be a musician? Well, the answer was pretty obvious in light of that fact, that of course they must be musicians. And if they had lived 20 million years ago, they must have invented music a lot longer ago than we did. So that thought that triggered the whole story. And what I did, I wrote it as a, first of all, the first incarnation of the story of Ripple was actually a poem, a one-page poem. It's actually in the back of the book. Mm-hmm. But then I wrote it as a 1,500-word story, and I submitted. I thought the story was it. I thought it was finished. It was a picture book, a sophisticated picture book, and that the publishers were going to fall over themselves to get it and pay me thousands and all the rest. But I submitted it to Barbara Else, who is a literary assessor, and she told me that this story was not complete. She said, it's just a skeleton. You need to flesh it out. So I then sulked for 15 years because I was a bit grumpy about that. And when I'd finished sulking for 15 years and also gone through a few healing processes that I needed to go through personally before I was ready to take on a challenge like writing a novel, I finally started in 2009. I wrote the first draft, and doing that was a very interesting psychological journey for me. And of course, I didn't know how to write a novel. Writing a novel is no light matter, and I had to, children's books are a very different thing. And before I could write the novel, I had to learn the craft. So learning the craft involved, I did a course with the Creative Hub in Auckland, which was an advanced fiction course, and I did that while I was writing the second draft. But while I was writing the first draft, I used a book list that Barbara Else had provided me with, a book list of books on the craft of novel writing. And I used those to help me get the first draft roughed out. And then did the course, and the course provided me with a critique group, which helped a lot in getting the second draft polished. These were we call them the rogues. They're my friends from the Creative Hub course, and we're still in contact, and we still critique each other's work all this time later. So that was one of the best things I did, was getting a really good critique group around me, and they help a lot with with getting the work polished. Yeah.
Now tell us more about Ripple. Who is Ripple?
Ripple is a young female dolphin who lived 20 million years ago, and she was an ancient spirit who came to Earth, came to this planet, which in the story, I should mention, in the story the planet is not called Earth, it's called Azure.
Yes.
Azure being the colour of the planet. Ripple was a spirit with something she needed to achieve, but which she had tried for hundreds of lifetimes and failed to achieve. And the deities who were in command of this spirit decided to give her one last chance to achieve her objective. And they thought very carefully about which planet to let her be born on. What's the word I'm looking for? Incarnate. To where she could be incarnate again for one last chance. And they needed to find a life form that was intelligent as possible without being at the stage of having any past life memory, because those deities felt that her past lives were more of a hindrance than a help to her in achieving her goal.
Yes.
And so, but they had a feeling that she needed to be in a life form that had a high level of understanding of sound. So they chose the dolphin as being perfect for their needs. It was an advanced life form, but not so advanced as to have past life memory, but it had a very high level of sound processing ability. So they felt that that was the perfect life form for her to be incarnated
yes.
as. So she was born to carefully chosen parents and began her life on Azure. But because she had this, because she was such an ancient spirit and such a troubled spirit, she wasn't a perfect dolphin. She had some emotional issues, and because of the strange brainwaves which were related to the objective she was trying to achieve, she was perceived by many to be insane. And so she had a lot of difficulties in the way of achieving what she needed to achieve. But eventually she was inspired by love. Ripple is a love story, and this was what helped her to get where she needed to go in the end. So.
Very interesting. We were talking yesterday about the whole the relativity of sanity and insanity, and the parallels with the human condition. And I was telling you about my idea of there being, like what we have, they call it Alzheimer's disease. In people, it doesn't kill them, but they get dementia.
Yes.
And a lot of it can be traced to effects of accumulation of heavy metals and other toxins in our bodies. And we were talking about how the bodies of some whales and dolphins, when they've died and they've studied them, they've had unbelievable levels of these toxins in their tissue, and it led me to speculate there could be a cetacean's Alzheimer's syndrome that might affect them mentally and possibly have something to do with strandings or anomalous, possibly aggressive behavior that's not usually associated with them and things like that.
Yes, I think about that a lot. Ingrid Visser, I think, who studies our orca, has found huge levels of dangerous chemicals in the bodies of orcas that she's been able to analyse. So that happens. The story that I'm writing at the moment has dolphins dealing with other dolphins who are suffering from the effects of these poisons. Of course, none of that comes into Ripple because
people aren't here yet.
There were no people here yet. The oceans were pure and perfect in Ripple's day. But in my new story, not so. And this is part of what they have to deal with the modern dolphins.
Yes. Is it okay to mention that about what happens in the new book about the nets?
Yes,
because of its relevance to what's actually happening in New Zealand right now.
Well, yes, I'll come to that. Ripple is relevant because one thing that Ripple deals with is the consequences to man of dolphin extinction, which brings us to the Maui's dolphins and all of the problems that they are facing today. And it's looking as though New Zealand could be one of the first country in the world to allow a species of marine dolphin to go extinct.
Right before our very eyes.
Right close to where I live, in fact, because I live near to Raglan, where Maui's dolphins have been seen. And one of the threats to the Maui's dolphins is fishing and dolphins being caught in nets. So there is a scene in my new book where a mother dolphin has to watch her baby being killed slowly, crushed slowly in a fishing net, and it was a very, very difficult, traumatic scene to write for me. And it's, but it had to be done. So it looks like we've got some rain happening here. Is that a problem?
No. Is it okay with you?
Well, I'm all right. As long as your camera gear is okay.
Yeah, if it doesn't rain too much, we'll be all right.
Okay.
So does the second book have a title yet?
Yes, it's called Melody, the Dolphin Melody. And the dolphin Melody is also a musician herself, like Ripple. And there are some humans in the new story. There's a human musician as well who lives on Waiheke Island.
Human musicians living on Waiheke Island.
Yes, Māori human musicians living on Waiheke Island. And also human Māori artists come into the story a little too. So we have not just one art form in this story, but others as well. In fact, I have a haunted painting, but I won't go into that too much because it's still very much in the development at the moment, and I'm not too sure myself where it's all heading.
Yes.
But it's an interesting journey.
It's very interesting.
Yes. So, with writing a book like Ripple from the point of view of dolphins, one of my inspirations for this was a very famous novel I'm sure you've all heard of called Black Beauty. The reason why Black Beauty inspired me is because humans and horses worked together for many, many centuries, probably thousands of years, and in all that time there must have been thousands of books written about horses that vets used, and farriers and all sorts of people that worked with horses would have read all these books about horses that must have been written. But horses were still pretty much seen as machines, animals that were put there for humans to exploit, to help us progress. And when Anna Sewell wrote Black Beauty, it was that fiction story, it was that book which changed the world and made the world a better place for horses, because that was the first book that allowed humans to see the world from the point of view of a horse. And suddenly people became concerned for what might be nicer for a horse, and what might be cruel, and how could we make their lives better. And so I was impressed with that, because that book sold so many millions of copies all over the world. It really did make the world a better place for horses, and I thought, well, perhaps I could do the same for dolphins by writing a story from the dolphin's point of view. And to do that, I had to do a lot of research about dolphins. While I was writing the story, I was researching as I was writing to make sure I got it because although it's a fiction story, I wanted the factual background to be right. And I consulted with dolphin scientists and had the work checked by dolphin scientists in the UK, and went to every possible length to ensure that I got the background right. But yes,
it's tricky writing using English and having their dialogue in English.
Yes, because
they don't even use language.
They don't use language at all. I believe that dolphins probably they've been here for tens of millions of years before us. They are way beyond us. Light years past where we are with our very archaic, our very primitive is the word, communication systems which rely on sound. And I presume that they probably use what you would call telepathy to communicate. And that brings us to one of Ripple's great problems, because how do you communicate sound via telepathy? Because telepathy is thought, not sound. So this is another thing that Ripple had to wrestle with in her life. So, yeah.
So what is some of you're a big fan of the Rime of the Ancient Mariner by Samuel Taylor Coleridge.
Yes.
Is that your favorite piece of literature?
That probably is my favourite piece of literature.
Now tell us about that.
Well, when I was young, I learned it off by heart, and I could recite it. I could recite it to you now.
How long would it take?
Half an hour.
Can you say just the first 5 minutes of it?
It was an ancient mariner, and he stoppeth one of three, by thy long grey beard and glittering eye. Now wherefore stoppest thou me? The wedding gates are open wide, and I am next of kin. The guests are met, the feast is set, mayst hear the merry din. He holds him with his skinny hand. There was a ship, quoth he. Hold off, unhand me, grey-beard loon. Eftsoons his hand dropped he. He holds him with his glittering eye. The wedding guest stood still, and listened like a 3-year child. The mariner hath his will. I'll stop there. I won't continue.
But so where does it go? What's the story?
Well,
he's telling a story to these people.
Yes, the ancient mariner, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, in writing that poem, was one of the very early conservationists who cared about animals, a marine conservationist. He cared about the animals in the sea, because if you study that poem carefully, you will see, everyone knows it's about an albatross, and an albatross that was shot, and a sailor who was punished for his crime of shooting the albatross. But it wasn't just about an albatross, it was all about the whole ecology of the sea. The mariner wasn't pardoned by the spirit guides in the story until he came to understand that the loathsome creatures that crawled on the sea, which revolted him so much, it wasn't until he saw their beauty and saw their place in the world that was the moment when suddenly the albatross fell off and sank like lead into the sea, and the curse was broken, because he came to love those lowly ocean creatures which he had previously despised. And so that was the moment when the curse snapped. So to me, Coleridge was an early conservationist who valued not just the great and beautiful creatures, but also the lowly ones that are part of the environment that we all belong to.
Yeah,
but
did he like the evil octopus? I'm just kidding, but this is a character
Irish
from your
Kygel,
it's a character from your book.
Viper, Venga, Malavine, Lucifina, Sadistine, Fira, Lashette, and Claudine.
The names of its tentacles.
The names of the tentacles of my evil octopus, yes. I'm sure Coleridge would have valued Irish Kygel as much as he valued every other creature in the sea. But because I learnt that poem off by heart, and because I must have recited it in my own head 1,000 times in my life, I think the language became a part of my psyche. And so when people read Ripple, my reviewers around the world that have read this book often tell me that it is lyrical and poetic. And when I hear those statements, I say to myself, thanks, STC, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, because I'm sure that that's where my feeling for language came from. It came from there.
Very interesting.
So,
how old were you when you first read that for the first time?
I would have been in my teens,
okay.
And I think my stepfather would have suggested that I read it, and it was a favourite poem of his, and I just, for some crazy reason, I decided that I think I'd seen that film, you know, the one about the burning books, Fahrenheit 451,
yes,
and how all these people learnt whole books by hand, and
yep.
I thought, well, I'm not going to learn by heart. I'm not going to learn a whole novel by heart, but I'll learn the Ancient Mariner.
Yes,
that's a good thing to preserve, you know.
It could be that the cetaceans pass on things, sort of like maybe their equivalent of oral transmission of knowledge.
Absolutely, you'll read all about it in here. That's exactly what they do. Yes, they have historians that record all the knowledge that their dolphin astronomers are bringing in from planets all over the universe, and that has to be stored somewhere.
Yes, like their Homer, the wandering poet that could see with ultrasound.
Yes, my dolphins can certainly see with ultrasound. They can see inside one another's bodies.
Absolutely.
And communicate with unborn babies, and there's a lot of that happening in the story, that sort of thing.
Now, I thought to mention the name of the legendary name of one of my biggest heroes, Rachel Carson. And you're very much a Rachel Carson of today, which is one of my blogs that I've created. But you would really love her first 3 books that are about the ocean and life near the ocean and stuff. And they've got very much of an ecological sensibility. But then her 4th book, Silent Spring, really raised the alarm bell and is credited by many people as sort of founding the modern day environmental movement. But she created a vast amount of awareness about the harm to all life from the new generation of pesticides that arose after World War II. But yes, she's been very much an inspiration to me, and maybe we can watch one of those documentaries about her tonight.
I'd be very interested to see that. What an honour to be mentioned in the same breath with Rachel Carson, but you're not the first person who's done that. Some of my reviewers have said the the same thing, which I was extremely flattered and honoured.
Yes, she didn't write any fiction, as far as I know, but it's quite, it's very special. Her writing, it's very
Yes, I realise the part she plays in the environmental thinking of mankind, for the last 50 years or so. So yes, I'd really like to see that.
There's a beautiful book that was assembled after she died, called The Sense of Wonder. And
Well, that's another beautiful name.
that's
isn't it?
really special.
And Silent Spring. I mean, they're lovely words. Perhaps she should have been a poet or a fiction writer as well.
She was a very much of a hero,
Yes.
or a heroine.
Yes. I was just thinking, it's like the Anna Sewells and the Rachel Carsons.
And the Tui Allens.
Well, we wish. You never know.
So you went to Frankfurt, Germany. When was that? Last year?
Yes, New Zealand was the country of honour at the Frankfurt Book Fair in 2012.
And you were chosen to represent New Zealand.
Well, the New Zealand Society of Authors called for people to submit books, and you could submit book. It didn't have to be that year. It could be any time the book had been written, and a whole lot of people, authors, submitted books, and they chose 40 to take to Frankfurt, and Ripple was one of the ones that went. So I went to Frankfurt as well, and because of that was where I met the Jiri Ullman. I'm not sure if that's a correct pronunciation, who is a publisher in the Czech Republic, and he picked up Ripple at the Frankfurt Book Fair, and I've just recently signed a contract for him to translate the book into the Czech language, and I have also agreed to make him a website similar to my own Tuiscope website that features Ripple, but this one will have to be in the Czech language, and that's why we're sort of having to learn to be very careful with what we say when we're communicating.
You've made a good start with the word
Yes, I'm trying to avoid that word as much as possible.
But that's fantastic.
Yeah, it was an amazing experience to go to Frankfurt and to be at the book fair as a self-published author, which I was then, and now to be entering the world of traditional publishing via a foreign country in a foreign language is quite bizarre in a way, but it's certainly an interesting path for my book to take.
It's exciting.
It is exciting.
Now, who was the guy that you told me about yesterday who gave the copy of Ripple to that Czech guy?
Richard Webster.
Now, who was he again?
Richard Webster is a writer he mostly writes non-fiction on spiritual topics.
Yes, he's a Kiwi writer, right?
Yes, he's one of New Zealand's most successful writers that nobody has ever heard of, but he's actually done very, very well, and his books have been translated into lots of different languages. And Jiri Ullman also publishes Richard Webster's books, and it was Richard Webster who saw Jiri. Jiri was walking past the New Zealand Society of Authors stand at Frankfurt, and he spotted my book Ripple, and he really liked the cover. That was what caught his eye. And Richard got into conversation with him and said, "I'm sure Tui would love you to take that copy and keep it." And so that was how it all started. So Richard was a wonderful help to all of the authors in the Frankfurt 40. He was really terrific in preparing us for how to function at Frankfurt, because he had a lot of experience with the book fair and he'd seen it all before, and he coached us well to prepare us for our journey.
now, how was Frankfurt? How would that be different from other book fairs, or just would each one?
It's the biggest book fair in the world.
Is it?
For a start. It felt the book fair to me. It was like getting around inside the book fair was like getting around inside a big city. You had to catch a bus from one end of it to the other.
Really?
And it was multi-levels up into the sky, and it was whole halls for all different languages, and it was an amazing, quite a bizarre experience. You know, the people that I spoke to from the strangest countries in the world that I hardly knew existed, and to meet them there with this common theme of books was quite mind-blowing. And it was very, very challenging, but the whole thing was challenging because authors aren't really... The book fair is more about publishers and selling rights rather than actually selling books. You don't go to Frankfurt to set up a fair and charge $15 a book. That doesn't happen at Frankfurt. It's about selling rights, and that's what I somehow managed to do. So it was quite an exciting journey for a self-published author like me.
The seraphim were with you.
The seraphim, the deities were watching over me, yes.
Because they also have a role in Ripple too.
Ripple is narrated by a divine being, which I call a deity in the story. His name's Father Clement, and before you think I'm a crazy Christian, I'm not, and my deities are not Christian deities, but I think of myself as a spiritual person, and I needed to be able to have a narrator who was old enough to have been there at the beginning of Ripple's life and was also able to see the impact of Ripple's life on humanity 20 million years later.
Yes.
So the only person who could narrate a story like that had to be divine, and so I have this deity.
That's very
Father
interesting.
Clement.
Now, speaking of other legendary beings and people, you were very close friends with Sir Peter Blake.
I wasn't very close friends with him.
But you knew him.
He was a friend of our family. My brother Joe was very close to him because my brother Joe sailed with him on the successful America's Cup challenges.
Was that in 2000?
Was it 95 was one of the ones they won.
Okay.
I can't remember which was the other one, but there were two challenges that we won when Peter Blake was in charge.
I think 2000 was one because that was the year I got here. It was in February of 2000, and all those boats were in the Auckland harbour because the thing had just finished or something.
Yes, but there have been two in New Zealand.
Oh, okay.
I don't know which was the success. One was highly successful. We won 5-0.
Okay.
And another one was a complete disaster. And I
Really?
think that might have been the first one when Peter Blake wasn't in charge.
Ah.
And it was also the first one when my brother wasn't on the boat. So that might have had something to do with it as well.
Very significant.
But anyway, Peter Blake sailed with my father many years ago, back in the 1970s, before he was really famous. He sailed with my father on a boat called Escapade. And so I knew him because I also sometimes sailed on Escapade, and I knew various people in the crew. And
was that racing?
Yeah, racing. They were racing, doing a lot of racing. My father was right into yacht racing, and so I knew him. I wasn't close to him like my brother was, but I certainly knew him, and I would have loved Peter Blake to have lived to receive a copy of Ripple, because I think he would have loved it.
I think so too. It was really a lot of people aren't aware that he was killed while doing a sting operation in conjunction with a Greenpeace boat up the mouth of the Amazon River, trying to bust these people that were illegally logging mahogany up in there. And so
that was news to me. I had not heard.
It's in the last page of his book. It's called The Last Adventure of Sir Peter Blake, and it explains this whole story. And I said the word again, but he's someone, as I see it, who really cared. He wasn't just someone that was paying lip service to the environment, like so many people these days are, and just interested in getting people's money. But he, in the introduction to this book, you read his philosophy about how during all his travels around the world as a yacht skipper, he started noticing how bad the ecological devastation was in all these places, and so he took it on himself. He mustered all his resources and wanted to create a state-of-the-art sort of organization using all forms of media and publishing and broadcast, and he actually bought a special boat that had been built by Jacques Cousteau that has a retractable keel so it can go up into shallow rivers and stuff, and that's the boat he was on when they were killed.
Yes, I also heard that the kinds of details he noticed about the ocean that convinced him of the degradation that was happening was he noticed that when he first started his ocean sailing career, he would see all these albatrosses, far more, and then as the decades went by, he noticed fewer and fewer on every voyage that he took in the open sea, and these were the details that triggered his concern for the marine environment. So yes, he was definitely a committed and genuine ocean conservationist.
Yes.
To my mind. And I think that had he lived his life out, we would probably remember him long term more for that than for his early sailing victories.
Oh, absolutely. I think that I think the Key administration would have had a lot of problems going as far down the road that they were going right now if Peter Blake had been alive the whole time.
Yes, because by now he would have
been a very powerful person.
Would have grown.
Absolutely.
And
he might have even gone into politics.
What if he'd been the Prime Minister? I mean, what a wonderful thing that would be for New Zealand.
It would.
I wish.
Oh my God.
I wish he could have lived. Yes.
We've now relocated here to, is this Raglan Beach?
This is Whale Bay in Raglan, yes, and you can see the surf crashing in behind me there, and even a few surfers over there enjoying a good surf we're doing today. It's quite a grey sort of a day, but it's beautiful in its own way.
So tell us about who lives out in the ocean here.
Well, out here in this very part of our ocean, we have our last precious Maui's dolphins. There are only supposed to be about 55 of them left alive, and they live in this very part of the world. They're critically endangered, and if we don't do something urgently to protect them, they will have become extinct in maybe 10 or 20 years, even sooner if we don't act quickly. They're being killed by the fishing industry and fishing nets, and they're endangered by all sorts of other human activities like seabed mining and floating rubbish and poisonous waste that finds its way into the ocean, and it finds its way into the fish which the Maui's dolphin eat, and then those poisons are trapped inside the flesh of the dolphins. All of these are things that are contributing to the gradual decline in numbers of this animal. It's the world's smallest dolphin, and quite distinctive in appearance. It's got a rounded shaped dorsal fin rather than the pointier shark-shaped fin of the other kinds of dolphins that we get. So,
There's also a lot of seismic exploration for hydrocarbons going along this whole coastal area here. And the southern region of their habitat is the area of the greatest amount of offshore drilling in New Zealand too.
Well, this is very dangerous.
All of these things together. So the people keep saying, well, the government should do something. The government should do something. But why should people expect the government to do anything? And what are they going to do?
Well, the government can do some things like changing the zones for the various types of fishing. But one of the things, if you yourself want to personally help these dolphins and stop them from going extinct, there are things that we all as individuals can do, such as trying not to be such addicts to the oil that makes the seismic exploration necessary. If we could all wean ourselves off from our addiction to oil, then these kinds of activities would no longer be necessary. So we can help by trying to walk as much as possible and ride our bikes as much as possible instead of taking our cars, and try and use public transport or try and just to not travel, try and just live with a lot less oil. These are the things that can help the Maui's dolphins.
What about stopping eating fish?
Stopping eating fish, most definitely, because the fishing industry is what is the biggest threat to the Maui's dolphins right now. So the moment I heard about the plight that these animals were from fishing, that was the moment I personally stopped eating fish. And I haven't eaten a mouthful of fish since the first draft of writing this book, Ripple, because I knew that this was directly causing the problems for these animals, these beautiful animals out here. I don't eat fish and I don't eat meat because dolphins don't come on the land and steal my grain, and they don't steal my fruit off my fruit trees. So what gives me the right to go into their ocean and steal their fish? So that's why I don't eat fish, and I urge you to follow my example here.
But there's birds called tuis that are eating your persimmons.
That's true. And if I'm not quick and go and pick some for myself, those greedy tuis will get the lot. But it is lovely to know that my persimmon tree is encouraging them into my garden, because I really do enjoy having the greedy things there eating my trees.
They make beautiful songs.
They make beautiful songs, yes, and they look lovely stuffing themselves on my persimmons. So I enjoy their company. I can look at them out my window actually. I can see them while I'm working. I can see the tuis singing away in my trees.
Yes. So do you reckon that the that there's some little Maui dolphins out there right now, and they're aware of you and me standing here talking about them?
I would so love to just look out there and spot a little rounded fin, and it's a dream of mine to do that. I've seen many, many dolphins and many, many whales in my life, but I've never had the great privilege of seeing a Maui dolphin. And the way things are going, I may never have the chance, and my children will have even less of a chance to see that, because the people who I have met who have seen them have been totally changed. They've had deep spiritual connection to these animals, and they've never been the same since. Their lives have been changed just from one sighting of these dolphins, because they've got this magic to them. They're apparently very, very playful. They'll come right. They're not afraid of people. They'll come right up to you and swim beside your boat, which is lovely, but it also makes it dangerous because they can swim into propellers and they can get damaged by the propellers of the boat. So go out there in a surfboard and look for them, or go out there in a sailing boat or a kayak, but keep your propellers and your fishing nets away from our precious dolphins. It's a beautiful, spectacular day today.
It is awesome. If you could sit down with John Key and talk with him, what would you say to him? Would you just slap him first?
Yes, I probably would give him a few good, quick punches, because I really feel that what he needs to do is he needs to understand that there are things that are more important than the economy. The government seems to think the economy is the most important thing.
Well, the economy in quotation marks.
Yes. What's more important than the economy is the environment, and the Maui's dolphins are part of that. Our bush, our trees, our birds, all of these things are going to be there. We hope they're going to be there when the economy is long gone. I mean, the economy might be completely different in 100 years, but we hope that the environment will still be here. And this is the long-term thinking that we would like to encourage in our government, is to think of the environment long term instead of the short term money that seems to obsess them all the time, and it seems to colour every decision they make. Every decision is made around money rather than about things that are far more important, and that's what I've tried to drill into John Key's brain, but I don't think it's going to go very deep. But you never know, he might watch me and he might just listen.
But I think that what you hinted, what you said before about what the individual people can do, and largely through what we can stop doing or do less of, that's the way that, I mean, to me it's futile to think that a government, especially the Key administration, is gonna actually do anything that's gonna lessen the profit margin for any industry just because of some little dolphin, that.
Yes, it's an uphill battle to convince them about it, but. For a start, the tourist industry is going to appreciate us if we conserve our natural environment. And so perhaps we should put the tourist industry ahead of the fishing industry. And another thing I just thought of that individuals can do is things like the oceans at the moment are filling up with hundreds of truckloads of plastic waste every day. We should all as individuals be totally responsible, far more responsible for our waste that we generate than most people are. And whatever you do, make sure that not a speck of plastic ever gets into the ocean because of your personal actions. Plastic in the ocean can kill dolphins, and it kills birds and dolphins all over the world every year. There's whole floating islands of plastic in the middle of the ocean which are growing thicker and wider by meters every week because of the tons of plastic waste that is finding its way into our ocean. And also, when you're disposing of things like computers which have dangerous chemicals in them, make sure that you recycle them through a professional recycling company that will do it responsibly, and so that those poisons don't end up in the ocean as well, because all those poisons end up in the flesh of the dolphins. If you want to find out more about my book Ripple and my other writing that I'm doing, you can always find me online at www.tuiscope.co.nz. That's my personal website.
Will you spell it?
Yep. Tui scope is T-U-I, just like the word, and scope like a telescope. So it's TUISCOPE.co.nz. And you can also look me up on Facebook and various other online social marketing locations.
And who are you on Facebook?
Tui Allen, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, Tui Allen on Facebook.
And probably in a few months we'll be able to read your book in Czech.
Yes, very soon the Czech Republic are going to be, a publisher in the Czech Republic is putting out a translation of Ripple for the market in the Czech Republic and Slovakia. So she will be in 2 Central European countries, landlocked European countries, which is a little bizarre because she has never been conventionally published in this sea nation, but it's going to be in a landlocked country first. So it's a weeny bit strange, but in New Zealand, if you want my book, you have to get it from Amazon as a print book or as an e-book. So you just need to search for Ripple Tui, and you can find it currently at 99 cents as an e-book on Amazon.
That sounds like a good deal. And when do you reckon Melody's going to be finished?
Melody, I'm hoping to have her finished sometime later this year, and but then she'll be going through processes of assessment and editing, so it probably won't be before next year that she actually gets published.
Yes. Any final closing words?
Just what a beautiful day it is here with the wind and the ocean. It's just so lovely to hear the sea crashing around me and see humans enjoying the sea. And to look out there and see that somewhere now, they're still out there now. So just enjoying being in the same world with them for the last few years that it's still possible. And hope that it doesn't come to an end in my lifetime.
Miracles are possible.
Miracles are possible, and hopefully my granddaughter will one day be able to come here and know that they're out there somewhere as well.
Yes. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this.
Thank you very much, Jeff, for taking the time to do it with me.
Okay, we'll talk again soon.
Sure. Okay. Talk. I've got you.
You've been listening to On the Brink Radio with Jeff Wefferson interviewing Tui Allen about her book Ripple. And thank you for joining us, and stay tuned again next week. Okay, bye.
I got that, I think. I hope
there was really no need.
Check that I did get
It's
that?
still recording.